There is an exit out through that door there. You can see it's lit up in green, and it would stay green even if all the lights went out. And then out onto the lawn, and you'd be safe out there as long as you don't run out onto the road. If you're over this side, this also is an exit out here, straight out that door, and up to the car park is the safest route, okay? If you find the call of nature comes upon you, then there are conveniences just across the concourse. So out that door and across the concourse. If you go in and the lights are dark, don't panic, they come on automatically. The next thing is this little microphone and our sound system, this one particularly is a radio mic, it reacts terribly to mobile telephones. So if you've got one, would you please turn it on to off or flight mode or something like that. Otherwise, from time to, and it won't pop. There is a donation bucket at the back of the church. If we get £15 to cover the costs of our setting up and lighting and all that sort of thing, and the gas that we need on this freezing evening, anything beyond that will go to the East Africa Famine Appeal. Okay? So if you're making a donation, £15 will go to cover our costs, but there is. For those who are not used to them, this is a microphone. I would ask everybody at all times to please use the microphone. The reason for this is not because we don't think you have a loud voice, but because this is hooked up to our loop system. So if you're using a hearing aid, please turn to T, and you should be able to hear nice and clearly. Now, talking about process, each of the candidates is going to give to us 2 minutes in which they can state, well, whatever they want to state, really. But it might be that they want to say, here I am and this is why I want to be here. They might say, I think these are the critical issues. I suppose it's really up to you how you use that. But I know you use it well. And then I've got 2 preset questions, which they know about. After that, it's going to be over to you, but we're going to need some order, or we can be stuck on one question all night. You've seen that happen, haven't you? The process we're going to use is when a question is asked, you might ask one particular candidate, and that's fine. The others might say, well, that was your question, that's fine. You may wish to come in on that question, that's fine too. But please, could you keep your answers to 2 minutes? If you don't, Rob will ring the naughty bell. It's just so that we can keep moving on. And candidates, please, I know that from time to time someone is going to say something you firmly disagree with. It would be really wonderful if you didn't get an argument going between you, but if you've got something you want to say, write it down on a bit of paper, and when you get another question, figure a way to answer it when you're answering the next question. Is that all right? Because I want this to be question and answer, so people can hear your responses rather than the debate that can happen between candidates and probably might not be the most optimal way forward. If you're asking a question, you have 30 seconds to ask it. That is to stop people from making grand political speeches from the congregation. You are not allowed to stand on the chair when you are making your question. When you ask a question, could you please ask one question? Okay? This microphone works when you point it at your mouth. It doesn't work very well if you hold it up like a lollipop. It has a range of something about that. Anything outside that, it just won't work. Point it at your mouth, it works really well. Please try and remember that. Don't make... Oh, and another good point. Okay? Right. I think at this point we're ready to go. So, from the candidates, can you work this out amongst yourselves? Who goes first and second and third and fourth? Can I leave that to you as adults? We're interested to hear what you have to say to us. Please begin.
Good evening, my name is Dan. I was here 2 years ago when I stood in the general election and came second, so thank you for that support. So, before I go any further, I just want to say that, of course, this hustings was not supposed to be tonight, but actually last week. And it's only right that we take into consideration the horrific attack in Manchester. But actually, you know what? Our democracy is what we've fought for centuries. And it's great to see tonight that we're back again and actually discussing the issues together. I respect and like everyone here. It's about our opinions which differ, and that's really important in this debate tonight. So, why am I spending this time? Well, in the last 2 years I've become a dad. And I think that's really kind of changed my outlook in many ways in life. Firstly, I'm more skint than I was 2 years ago, and I don't have much social time. This is in fact my night out this week. In other ways though, it's also kind of refocused the sort of society I want for my daughter, for our children in the future as well. And that's why I'm kind of a little bit worried right now, because we're kind of going through some really messy, hard Tory Brexit proposals ahead of us, and a time of uncertainty. And we've also got the kind of, I suppose you call it the chaos of a potential May government coming our way as well, which I find quite terrifying. I can see from the nods that many of you do too. So I really want to do something with this country to make it fairer. And that's why I'm proud to stand for the Labour Party, because our values are that we pull together and we come together, just like in Manchester, I think, to go through the hard times so that we don't leave anyone behind. And that's whether it be taking children out of poverty in the last government, starting Sure Start centres, reinvesting in the NHS, in education. These are key policies that we're focused on. I'm going to go further with this, and this is why I'm so proud of the manifesto that we have now. We're going to be pushing ahead to delivering free university education, something that I think should happen, and actually most MPs themselves have benefited from themselves as well. We want to have a new type of society which is more compassionate by investing in our schools, by stopping this kind of crazy notion of selective education, by making sure our NHS is there for the future and to stop its privatisation. These are just some of the key issues, and I can't wait to hear from you tonight what your thoughts are on these too. Because if I'm your MP, I will say what I mean, I will vote what I mean, and I will keep to my values always. Thank you.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Really great to see some young people in the audience tonight as well. Politics is most definitely not just for grown-ups. So I'm Heidi Allen. I've been your Conservative MP for the last 2 years, and I feel a little bit like an apprentice who's been pulled in front of the boss a little bit sooner than I thought I would, because I think pretty much everybody in this room probably was expecting a 5-year term, as indeed I was. So here I am after just 2 years. And I live in Singapore with my husband Phil, who's sitting over there, and many of you will know that I was very new to politics when I was elected in 2015. I came from a business background. I was running a manufacturing business with my husband Phil, and prior to that I'd worked for really big industrial organisations like the Royal Mail, like London Underground. And I never in my life thought I'd be interested in becoming an MP. To be honest, I actively avoided question time, and I have to tell you, I'm not the biggest fan even now, not unless I can pause and fast forward. But it was the Tottenham riots in 2011, which you may remember, absolutely shook me out of my comfort zone, because it didn't look like it was my country that I was watching on television, and I got so angry. And my husband Phil turned to me and said, well, Heidi, if you care about your country that much and you're worried about it, don't just sit there. Stand up and get involved and do something. So that's what I did, and as you'll know, I was elected as your MP in 2015. And being your MP, it really has two sides. There are the local issues I've been working on, so desperately trying to improve the amount of affordable housing we have in South Cambridgeshire, working to improve the infrastructure so that we can use some of that housing, so building a station at Adam Brooks. We're going to have this Oxford to Cambridge Rail Lincoln Road link. And probably the greatest privilege of being a constituency MP is being quite often the last port of call that individual constituents come to you with a problem that they just haven't been able to solve anywhere else. And that's an incredible responsibility, but I have to say I've absolutely loved it, and it's a real privilege that goes with the job. And I've been fighting to get our improved funding for our schools, and that battle is most definitely not over. Nationally, I've sat on the Work and Pension Select Committee, and you may know I've been quite heavily involved in influencing the national debate on welfare policy, particularly incomes for people on low earnings and also for the disabled, and I've been a very strong voice in asking for more from this country in terms of our response to the children refugees, particularly those trapped in Europe. And my 2 years, I feel like I've only just begun. I've got so much more to do. So if you would like to retain somebody who will be as independent as they possibly can be, somebody who wants to be able to think with their head and their heart, and to be a modern politician, partition, working cross-party. You know, when I visited those refugee camps, it was with Yvette Cooper. I'm not precious about which party we have to work together. So if that's the kind of MP you want, then please vote for me on June the 8th.
Hello, my name is I'm going to need your help. My name is Simon. I live in Bassingbourn, where I run an organic small holding with my wife and children. And this wonderful event, which is my favourite husting, and I'm not just saying that, it is always my favourite husting because Bruce is so wonderful. Well, that's great. Come in there. I'm actually going to ask you something in a minute, Bruce, so that's why I'm buttering you up. But the hustings we've had have been really interesting so far, and this is our 5th. And for us up here, it's a little bit like a soap opera, because every time we sort of turn up the same old characters and we're all sitting here saying similar sorts of stuff, and it gets a bit sort of tedious. And it's unfortunately, it's a bit like Coronation Street for us, and that's the name of the soap opera and the reality we're living in, because it's not unfortunate if you're Heidi, because Coronation Street is her favourite soap, and it's what we're doing. We're coronating Heidi, which is my problem with all of this, because it's fine to have a first past the post system if there is genuine fairness, and there isn't at the moment. So one of the things I hope we can talk about tonight is the electoral system, because the electoral system is so ridiculously out of date that we need to change it. We need to have a proportional system where there is fairness. So hopefully we get to talk about that. But my main issue is one that I'm going to ask Bruce to help me with, which is our planetary crisis. And Bruce, I'd love you to walk among our wonderful audience and just hand those out at random. And for me, the Tory front row definitely doesn't want one. Because we're meant to be a neutral time, so I'm sort of abstracting you from all insides. So the issue that I'd like to raise is the issue of our time, and it is the planetary crisis, and it's the reason the Green Party was formed. And the Green Party was formed not because we wanted to bring everyone down and just be a pain in the butt. We were formed because what Bruce has very kindly handed out is scientific, not my opinion, scientific opinion. And that scientific opinion is the basis of Green Party policy. And that's crikey, don't I get any? You're having such a good time. I'll carry on just for a little bit more. The issue that the Green Party has is that the scientists are telling us we have 3 crises which are coming together: the planetary crisis, of our resource crisis, our climate crisis, and our biodiversity crisis. And those things are scientific fact. And the Green Party is saying, therefore, because our economic prosperity, because the food we eat, the air we breathe, is all based on our planet, we need a healthy planet, and that should be at the top of the political agenda.
We've taken 15 seconds.
In spite of my foreign accent. I'm a former teacher, I hold a doctorate in education, and I'm currently a governor at Melbourne Village College. I live with my husband Hans in Belgium, and we have 3 children who've grown up here and attended local schools, and the schools have been a big part of our lives here. For the past 13 years, I've been a district and county councillor. I've been working on bringing public services to the community, especially mental health, Citizens Advice Bureau, and community policing, and I work a lot on affordable and accessible public transport, rail, cycle and buses, and we need a much better transport network here in South Cambs. How the next government shapes our relationship with Europe through Brexit is going to be very important in determining the kind of society we leave for our children. I'm concerned that the Conservatives are aligning themselves with Trump, in spite of being half American myself. I'm not at all happy about it. I'm concerned that we should be collaborating with our European neighbours with whom we have built peace and a collaborative economy over decades. And this is something that we must take very seriously and understand before we rush headlong into the unknown. The Liberal Democrat policies are aimed at a collaborative and open society, and we must pause and understand our Brexit options. And I've been spending the last year talking with local businesses, schools, enterprises about how they will be affected by Brexit. It has actually been fascinating to understand the tapestry of Europe in our lives here in the UK, because we are all part of a common world. The LibDems are very pragmatic and honest about the way they would raise funds for the NHS and their prioritisation on mental health, social care and preventive public health, and also properly funding our state schools as inclusive, comprehensive schools for all, and focusing especially on early years and teacher recruitment. Is that the end, or is that 15 seconds? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. You've mentioned, and you've also mentioned, Heidi, about housing and transport. When we had our hustings for the county councillors and for the mayoral elections, one of the questions that came up time and again was the question of housing, linked to the question of transport, and of course linked to the question of development. So the question that I would like to ask you is, what do you think are the critical issues around the housing problems we are facing in this county, and how would you address them? So, who would like to start? Yes, please.
My own son in his 20s has been living at home for a couple of years, and I'm sure this is very common because housing is unaffordable. In South Cambridgeshire, we have 1,700 people on the housing register, and we are not building affordable houses. The planning system is failing us. Our local plan, as you know, is suspended, and the speculative development which is coming to many South Cambs villages where it was not planned means that we're not able to ensure the building of affordable houses that we need. And I think by building in new communities, we would be able to supply the jobs and the transport links we need for the people who are living there. And the LibDems have advocated the building of new garden cities where you have a holistic community without being stuck somewhere at a distance from your employment, especially in South Cambridgeshire, where so many villages may have only one bus a day, one bus a week, no way really of getting to work. Even post-16 education and training is now, young people are left on their own. There's no more support from the county council for their transport. So these things are inextricably linked, and our planning system has let us completely down. This is dropping. So to sum up, I would say we really need to be building communities with strategic infrastructure and jobs built in. Thank you.
So, as Susan says, the biggest problem we have here is the speed with which we can build housing of all types, but especially affordable housing. And the real weakness that we have is that while our local plan is still being digested by the planning inspector, and I have written to her twice, and quite politely being told to mind my own business, apparently don't interfere with the speed of the planning inspector, but I have tried. The problem we have is while we're going through this period, we're in a vacuum, and we need this thing called a 5-year land supply, which basically means we have to be able to prove that we've got a plan in place that will satisfy our need for our growth over the next 5 years. And we do have that plan. It's building in strategic sites like Northstowe, like West Camborne. But the problem is big sites like that don't happen quickly, particularly when they're old MOD land and the land often needs to be decontaminated be upgraded before Northstowe can be accessible, for example. So we've got a bit of a problem. Now, about 3 months ago, I went to see the Housing Minister, Gavin Barwell, with our own housing portfolio holder from South Camden to Hartford, and we had just that conversation with him. And he said, you know what, you're not on your own. Places like Oxford, Bicester, Milton Keynes, they're suffering from exactly the same problem. So your areas that you're positive about growth, you accept it, but you want to be strategic. You don't want to have these little developments popping up all over villages when the infrastructure can't cope with it. We agree you should have it in these big strategic sites. Heidi, you need an exemption from that 5-year land supply. Areas like yours need that. And I was right in the middle of that conversation with the Housing Minister when the general election was called. So if I'm successfully re-elected on Thursday, then I will pick up exactly where I left off. But in the meantime, we're also doing creative stuff. You know, we're working with housing associations and parish councils to see where we can sneak in 2 or 3 houses here on the edge of villages so that we can have local people not having to move too far away from where they've grown up, where their families are. And in our manifesto, we've got some really good stuff coming forward. We're talking about taking planning permission away from developers who land bank, who sit on it and wait for the value. We all know that happens around here. If you haven't built it in 3 years, we're going to drop that to 2 years. So there's some creative stuff like that we're doing, but also allowing councils to borrow more to build more council housing, which we desperately need. So I love that part of the manifesto.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of what Susan and Heidi said about the general state of things. I think the thing that hasn't been mentioned is where power rests. And the power rests at the moment increasingly in distant offices and increasingly in centralised offices. And for me and the Green Party, it's about trying to relocalise. And it's trying to relocalise the power that we have to say, yes, this is a great development, no, this is not something that's right for our villages. Yes, we need more affordable housing. Like Susan, I've got a son and a daughter who have no idea how they're going to get on the housing ladder, with 300,000 being the baseline in Bassingbourn. So we need to take back some of that control, and we need to have that in our hands locally. So it's about localisation, it's about taking that power back. Obviously, it's also about building affordable houses, and the Green Party has a plan to build affordable housing, and specifically affordable housing, because at the moment, what's termed affordable is not always affordable. And the term affordable has lost its real meaning, which for the Green Party is that it should be 3 times the median income. And at the moment, affordable housing is more like 7, 8, 9 times, depending where you are. So it's lost its real meaning. The other problem is that it gets sold out onto the market after a very short time very often. So the Green Party is about trying to recreate the council housing stock, but also looking at other innovative solutions with local co-ops, so local communities forming their own housing associations, the existing housing trusts. I was a trustee of a local housing trust in Bassingbourn. It can be done. It's difficult because of the planning system at the moment and the barriers that are put in front of achieving that, but that's what we would like to see. More genuinely affordable housing for local people that remains affordable in the long term. Thank you.
I would look at the big picture here and not so much just those details, because those details are important, but it's actually at the heart of this issue is a social injustice, and that is the problem. And I think it's hard trying to manipulate a free market model when it's been left to go rampant for so long. So we have developers coming in and they're building for profit. That's how the free market works. If you go to a Prime Minister like Macmillan or Attlee, they had an idea of building houses so that it was a right for everyone to have a home. And I think we've lost that somewhere along the way, where it's now become an asset which you then sell on in the future. So you know what, I think we should go back to affordable housing and social housing and really reinvest in these things properly in our system. We also have to have, I think, more controls given back to councils again, so they don't just are forced to sell their stock or borrow on their stock only. They're going to start building council houses so we can actually start giving people the opportunity to have their own home in the future. I'm not against, actually, people buying their council house one day, but what I am against completely is when we didn't even replace that stock to the point where you're making, I think it was only about 3 years ago, there are 300 homes built, council homes built, in the whole of Great Britain. Now you tell me that that is not the problem in our housing crisis. So yes, the details that the other candidates have highlighted, I agree that these are problems, but it doesn't go to the heart of the problem. that social injustice. The system stinks, and that's what we have to sort out.
The second set question, many of you will have received a letter some time ago from the heads of schools. And the one I received, I'm sure you're aware of this particular paragraph within it. Dear parents and carers, together with all of the secondary school head teachers in South and East Cambridgeshire, I am writing to you concerning the very difficult funding situation that our schools are currently facing. This is not a step that we've taken lightly, but with the proposed changes being made to the funding formula that allocates money to schools and the significant cutting money in real terms that our schools receive from the government, we feel that we have no choice but to inform you of the unsustainable pressures we are under and to ask for your support. I think that it would be fair to let Heidi respond to that first, if you're happy to do that.
No problem at all. I too received that letter, not least because I've been leading on a campaign with every single primary and secondary school in South Cambridgeshire to challenge the government to look at their fairer funding formula again. You will know, I'm sure, that historically Cambridgeshire has been pretty much the lowest funded authority in the whole of the country. In recent years we've got up to about 10th from the bottom. But what it means in practical terms is that our children have around about £2,000 per head less per year than a child in inner city London or some of the other cities in our country, and that's clearly not fair. The government was right in the middle of the fairer funding formula consultation to try and balance that up. And it's fair to say that the formula hasn't worked in a way that MPs like me were expecting it to. And I think there's basically just a bug in there, it's not working. And there are an awful lot of us on my side of the House of Commons, Conservative MPs, who have spoken in great numbers to Justine Greening and said, Justine, something's gone wrong here, this just isn't working. And we were in the middle of this consultation, and through my office, we helped draft a letter to go to every single parent, governor and carer of every child in every school in this constituency. We provided a template response because the consultation was quite technically complex, and we knew that some parents would be put off from filling that in. So we provided like a crib sheet. All of this is on my website if you want to see it. And we also encourage schools to take petitions at the front desk. All of that we've gathered together, ready for me to take to Justine Greening when, of course, the general election was called. So that you may well raise your eyes and go, suck your teeth there, but it's true.
No, it's
The day that the manifesto came out and announced that the government wouldn't cut anyone and that £4 billion would be put in to balance those that would have been cut, I texted Justine Greening personally and said, Justine, this is great, but what happens to our fairer funding formula? We're halfway through that consultation. Are you telling me that's the end of the road? No, she said, as soon as this general election's over, if we come back to Parliament, that consultation continues, which means that every single Tory MP like me, where the formula hasn't worked, we've been lobbying with our schools to government, that piece of work continues. Justine knows it doesn't work, and I'm very, very hopeful that we will be able to improve that.
Susan, you've been a governor. Would you like to respond to this next?
Yes, as a governor at Melbourne Village College, like other governors, I've sat in meetings trying to decide on horrendous cuts to the fabric of a school, and that was before now. There is no fair funding for South Cam schools, and when you look at the School Cuts website, it's absolutely staggering the number of schools which will be very seriously affected by this bug. But in addition to that, I would like to point out that I think the proposal which is in the Tory manifesto for grammar schools will further undermine very successful village colleges here in South Cambs, which have the chance to give all young people an outstanding education. And we need now more than ever, particularly now, support those village colleges to the utmost of our ability. We also need to incentivize teachers to come to the profession and to be motivated to stay in the profession. We need to not test and test and test. Ofsted needs to take a long-term view, not a short-term pressure. And we need to reinstate our teacher training colleges and think carefully about teacher salaries in the current with the funding formula, and we need to, really, we have a whole set of issues that we need to take stock of and get to grips with now. Thank you.
Okay, let's just face the reality of the situation, locally and nationally, because it is important to think about both. If May is Prime Minister on Friday, then I know from talking to local head teachers, and in particular I use Sawston here actually, they're going to be looking at losing about 12 teachers next year. So when you think about it in those terms, just think about the impact in the classroom. As an ex-teacher myself, I know what it's like in a big classroom environment where you're trying to mark all the books, get to know the children, have that relationship where you can actually help the children. But if you've got classes rising and teachers going to the classroom, so that in September children don't even know which teacher's going to be in front of them, and teachers don't know what job security they have because there isn't any, then that's what we're facing in education right now. Now, it's not actually called, I'm afraid to correct you to what you said there, a fair funding formula. They've got rid of the fair part. And that's because they decided, and I agree, this had to be tackled, and it's been going on for far too long, under different governments as well. But they wanted to tackle this problem by saying, we need to put more money into the schools that don't have enough money, but we don't want to take it away from other schools that have more money now. And that is the problem, because the Tories will not put money in education. They take from it, they don't put in. There are two decisions that are made by certain MPs, some of them quite close to us, where people voted to cut the money going to local authorities. That is where the money is going from our schools, and that is why schools are up against the wall right now, and that is a real problem. Now, the website that Susan just mentioned, I recommend you go to schoolcuts.co.uk, and you can check out for yourself how your local school and other schools will be affected and how much money they're losing out on. Equally, this letter here is the one that was sent out to parents across this region, this county, and other parts of the country as well. Please read it. But I want to go slightly quicker and faster into the next part, which is not just the schools, but we want education for everyone. Why does it get to the stage where you're 18 or so and your educational opportunities stop? I think, and I know this from being a teacher myself, that people develop at different times. Want to make education available, because that's when you are liberated, you are set free, and you're given options for your future. So get rid of the tuition fees. They went up under the LibDem and the Tories by 300%. That is attacking social justice again. And that is at the heart, I'm afraid, of quite often most of these policies. Thank you.
Well, yes, a good round of applause. I'd like to congratulate Dan on the U-turn that Labour are taking on funding higher education at large. Very good. He's also taken a U-turn because the last Labour government sold off 610,000 council houses. So it's great. It's all good. We hope that this continues. But I'm a governor as well, and I know firsthand what's happening in the schools is beyond worrying. I'm a Bassingbourn governor, and what Susan said is absolutely right. But the fairer funding issue is just one part of what's happening in education. And there's a bigger perspective. And the perspective that we're losing sight of is the overall approach that is being taken to education. And I'm afraid it's a very similar approach that's been taken to the health service. If we have future Tory governments, we will have a slowly privatised education system. Because that's what's happening right now. The MAT, we had just formed a MAT as part of Bassingbourn. The governors were between a rock and a hard place. We had no real choice. It was a government initiative. The direction of travel is increasing academies, increasing MATs, all of which is a slow step towards privatisation. So we have to be very, very serious about our education system, because I agree with Dan. The Green Party has always been about an inspiring, lifelong education system that's properly funded and seen as a fundamental public good. It should be one of our key public services, along with the health service, education. They are the keys for the future. And the Green Party is about long-term vision, long-term investment. And I'm afraid the road we're going down is a very dangerous road, and we need to be very careful about what's going to happen in education.
It is no, I'd rather not do that, because if we start doing that, we get doing it all night. And I think these people need to be able to ask you the questions they like. See if you can get an for some questions from the audience, please. So I think the first hand up was yours. Thank you, Tony.
I would like to ask the candidates for their comments on the accuracy of the party leaflets which have been delivered to our homes, particularly with regard to the NHS. For example, we've had the usual scam stories referring to NHS privatisation and Tory NHS cuts, when the fact is that almost all GP surgeries have always been private organisations contracted to work for the NHS, and the fact that the last Chancellor to cut the NHS budget was Dennis Healey under instructions from the IMF.
I'm going to try and keep this going so people don't end up as first or second or third all the time. Now,
Your comments on the accuracy of the party leaflets.
Comments on the accuracy of party leaflets. Which party leaflets, please, Tony? I think that's important.
Well, this one.
I'll grab it if you like.
This one refers to Theresa May's heartless NHS cuts.
Can I give that to the...
And this one refers to health service privatisation.
Okay, well, I take these to the candidates. Who hasn't gone first? Dan, you go first.
Not important.
Well, I happily stand behind this because actually I'm right. On to your first point, you're not taking into consideration inflation. So you take one number, yes, £100 200 years ago was great, but nowadays it doesn't really get you anything, that's the problem. So when it comes to privatisation, it is being privatised, it has been privatised. I'm not talking about GP surgeries, I'm talking about, for instance, Virgin Eye Care, a private provider coming in to provide a service for us. The Naylor report, something that not everyone had heard about yesterday, where we're now finding out that NHS buildings can be sold off to the private sector so we can raise £10 billion to NHS. That is privatisation. It goes back to Oliver Letwin, the great sage he is himself, where he wrote the book Privatising the World. I'd recommend you read it, but it's mostly rubbish and drivel. But he actually had a philosophy of privatisation of the NHS, of railway, of water, of everything. And he said the world would work much better. And I just don't agree with that. So I proudly stand for my manifesto. I proudly stand behind this as well. And I'm considering this Friday, just to go to Simon's point, I don't want to talk about just the past and the issues we've had in the past. I want to talk about the future. And this is a real issue that worries me. On Friday onwards, under May's government, privatisation is a reality, school cuts are a reality, losing teachers, doctors is a reality. And why do you think it is that we've got a health minister, which I think is actually a bit of a travesty of a phrase for this man, Jeremy Hunt, who's attacking our junior doctors and placing and enforcing an appalling contract upon them, which they are saying is not safe, because they're only interested in saving money. And I'm not. The actual NHS of this question is about treating people who are sick. Can we get back to that issue? Thank you.
It wasn't my leaflet, but my leaflets are great. It went if it comes through the door. If it comes through the door, the post office seems to be delivering it around Huntingdonshire, and there's several in St Albans, so who knows? I suspect a Tory cover on them. Yeah, well that's true. I got a picture. I got a phone call from someone saying I've got yours and mine as leaflets, but I don't seem to be able to vote for you. So. At least they were going to vote for me. Where were we? Health service. Yes. Well, I agree with Dan, and I was congratulating Dan on getting your policies up to speed and making them more like ours. So don't take it as an affront. And you know, the same applies to the health service. You know, I mean, unfortunately, that you haven't got the greatest record with PFIs and etc. So for me, the health service is, as I've said, about education. It's one of our national We should be cherishing the health service, and at the moment we are not cherishing the health service. We're slowly privatising it, we are starving it of funds, and it isn't what it should be. And so that needs to change, and it needs to change very quickly, because it's the same process we're going through in education and health. So I'll let Susan talk about the leaflet, but
I'm not sure, but the LibDems may have put out more leaflets than anyone, and the more you communicate, the more people can come back on points, which is part of the debate. So Cambridgeshire has one of the most challenged health economies in the UK. And as a member of the Health Committee at the County Council, I have, just like being a school governor, had to sit and help decide where we're going to be cutting part of our health budget, because part of the health budget is the social care budget and the public health budget, which is channeled through local authorities now. Local authorities have the public health responsibility, have the social care responsibility, and we are on our knees. The government has cut off our revenue funding, and the sorts of cuts we're making are absolutely horrific. Because social care is means tested, as we know through the dementia tax proposal, there's a lottery on what type of illness you're going to get and how you're going to be able to be cared for. And the means testing in social care means that when budgets are so tight, if you're living, for example, in an extra care home care scheme, and you're getting your packages and the components of the care you need suddenly become pared down to the bone. And I visited a care home last week where someone had discovered she couldn't afford a weekly shower. Now that's part of the health budget, but as well, we have an aging population, and we have an NHS that needs to adapt to an aging population where the older population requires a greater level of care. And we are going through a transformation plan which has some sensible efficiencies in it and some sensible amalgamations, but also attached to that is the requirement to save an awful lot of money. And frankly, I don't see how we can do it. Finally, in terms of that's finally, thank you.
I think, Heidi, yours is the final voice on this.
Well, again, not my leaflets, and just by way of point of interest, you will never, ever, ever see negative campaigning on any literature that comes out in my name, because I'm interested in solutions. I'm interested in telling you what I have done, what I hope to do, what I think my party might do for the area, for the country. You will never see me personally attacking, and you will never see me decrying other people, because actually I think people, if I haven't got enough to say for myself, then I'm already losing the debate. On the subject of the NHS, it's tough. And no matter how much money we put in, and there are record amounts of money going in, but Dan's right, inflation plays a part in that, it's never going to be enough because we have a massively growing ageing population. And issues of obesity, diabetes type 2, smoking, we're not looking after ourselves as a population. So actually the solution for me is what we're starting to do really well in Cambridgeshire. It's a CCG, admin rules, GPs, the social care team from the county council working together as a team and going, you know what, we're doing a bit of that too. So are we. If we merged and did that together, we could save some money. Because I would much rather work as a holistic health system together, coming up with constructive ways to save money, and then when we do have some spare money to put into the NHS, I want it to go directly into the pockets of the NHS staff who work incredibly hard, and I don't believe we've had a decent pay rise for a long time. So I would rather that we work as a team, find efficiencies, and put that money there rather than into this big system, which at the moment is like a bottomless pit.
Questions? Yes.
Hello, Gareth.
Hang on, microphone's on its way.
I'll take inspection. Good evening, Gareth Jones from Great Abingdon. Why is it, do you think, that politicians and our media have so little understanding of the disastrous effects of non-tariff barriers we'll have on our trade with the EU when we become a third country? when we failed to conclude and get ratified a comprehensive trade deal within the short time available, or if we just walk away with no deal. Wouldn't it be better if we went for the interim safe haven of staying in the EEA single common market outside the EU by rejoining EFTA? And I'd recommend going to eureferendum.com for information on this vote. That's 30 seconds, isn't it?
Thank you. Heidi, would you like to take this one first?
We can, but I wonder if you wanted to keep going on.
Well, you haven't had first go yet.
All right, okay, fair enough. Well, here's the thing, we haven't got the deal yet. We don't know what it's going to be like. And our business that my husband Phil runs now, what do you say, Phil? About 80% of our business comes from France, Germany and Italy. So I think if anybody understands about tariff-free trade and how to build an export business,
Non-tariff barriers.
it's actually our organisation, so I know an awful lot about it.
Non-tariff barriers.
The deal isn't there yet. That's what this Thursday is about. It's whether you think Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Tim Farron, whoever you might believe, Karen Lucas, who do you think is going to be the best person to negotiate that deal? And how powerful, and how is she going to build, or he build a relationship with those other presidents and prime ministers of Europe? So I think, getting to this whole soft, hard Brexit, we don't know. This is what the next 2 years are going to be about. It's not going to be easy, I can't pretend it is. And there are going to be challenges, and in any negotiation, not all sides are going to get everything that they want. But I voted to remain. I was disappointed with the result. I suspect a lot of people in this room were. But I'm not going to waste time fighting it. I'm going to leverage the unique qualities that we have in this constituency, being one of the very, very few constituencies in this country that positively contribute to the UK tax coffers. I'm going to leverage that, because if the UK wants Brexit to work, it has to work for us in South Cambs, because if we don't work, the economy doesn't work. So I'm not going to waste time fighting it. I'm going to use our voice and make sure that our voice is heard at the negotiating table, because we owe it to every single business and person in this constituency, in this country, to get the deal right. And that is how I will choose to use my energies.
On non-tariff barriers, yes, non-tariff has got to be essential as part of the deal, because if we do have tariffs, then business suffers, our prices go up. I mean, just look at, for instance, at the moment, the cost of living crisis we've experienced in the last few months, because of the barrier that happened. So that is key in the actual negotiation process. But actually, I also want to focus on the other issues as well, and that's the fact that if we have our environmental protection laws torn up because we go through that process. So yeah, do think about who's in that room. Is it somebody who U-turns continuously? Somebody who doesn't actually put the environment first? Somebody who walks hand in hand with Trump? Because that's the kind of reality of crashing out of the European Union. I also want to think about workers' rights, and they've got to be an essential part of the negotiation. We can't just think suddenly we can make it up afterwards. We've got to make sure we keep those protections in place now. And finally, and this is a really important one, if we crash out of the European Union without a deal and have just had the divorce process, then we're looking at a major problem in our country. And that's not fear-mongering, that's reality. So we have to think about getting the best deal for our country, for everyone, not making ourselves into a tax haven on the outskirts of Europe. This is insular, and having to look at America and Europe and ask them to work with us. So I think those things are priorities, and a tariff-free is certainly a big part of that as well. Thank you.
Heidi and Dan make some very good points, and the point that Heidi makes about the unknown is absolutely right, and the points that Dan makes about the possible problems with ripping up environmental legislation or workers' rights legislation are absolutely right. The problem is nobody knows, and we're not going to know for the next couple of years while whoever goes and negotiates. We are not going to understand really what's being put in front of us until that process has happened. And so the Green Party policy on Brexit is very simple, and I believe it is entirely a common sense policy, is that when that trade deal, that general deal with Europe has been done by whoever it's done, that deal is then put back in front of the country in 2 years' time, and we say to ourselves, is that a good deal? Have they done well? Have they negotiated something that we can all get behind? And if we say, yeah, pretty good, then we go ahead and we carry on with that deal. But if they haven't, And if Theresa May, who it's likely to be, comes back and it's a bit like, no, I'm going to try, but who can do this? We have the opportunity to stay in the EU. So it's a simple ratification referendum when the deal's done, whether it's 2 or 3 years, and we give that power to the British people, as we did in the first place, to say, do we want to stay or do we want to go?
Thank you, Simon, for doing the first 2 minutes for me, because I completely agree with what you've said. The question actually, I think, alluded to the fact that I don't think government understands now what it's doing. And our relationship with the EU and in terms of our economy is so multifaceted. You cannot take one component out and say, well, we'll have that because that will help us. I visited a company in Shepperth the other day, Grants Instruments, who are going to be very hard hit by the customs union. The fall of the pound has hurt them. Their pension debt has gone up 50% already. I asked who in government comes to talk to you about how you're going to fare as an important business here in South Cambs. And they said, nobody. Nobody has come to talk to us until a few weeks ago we got an invitation from Bill Hammond's office by an email saying, would you like to represent the UK manufacturing sector in our parliamentary review? And they said, great, that sounds really good. So they made the phone call as directed, and then they were told, well, to participate we are asking a fee of £2,500. The reaction was, no way. This is not what's called democratic representation. It's not what's called trying to get an informed path. This is government. This messing around with our economy. And I frankly don't have any faith that the government knows what it's doing. I would like to ask, what is the Tory plan? What is the Labour plan? We are being asked to trust a person, like a personality cult. Theresa May will take care of it. Jeremy Corbyn will take care of it. This is the Brexit election, and nothing has been shown to us in terms of the detail now. And what Simon and I would agree on is that we need to understand what we're doing. We have a lot of education. We need to educate ourselves and then go forward.
I'm not actually certain if you didn't just ask a question and you're supposed to be answering it. But anyway, Heidi made a suggestion to me a little while ago. I think it's a good one. So we'll sort of go like this. So you'll get the first question in the next one, and you'll get the first question on the next one, and that way we can do that. So good idea. Okay. I haven't had anybody from this side of the planet. So yes, would you like to?
I hope you don't think this is redundant now, but Dan, I was really disappointed when Jeremy Corbyn had a 3-line whip on the 50, the vote on Article 50. Heidi, I wonder whether you really are. I mean, you were so keen on the EU, and have you really abandoned it? And for the other two, Susan mentioned democratic representation. The BBC and most of the media keep saying...
What's the time?
Sorry? The BBC and most of the media keep saying the British nation, the British people voted to leave. Are you all aware that it was 37% of the electorate that voted to leave? That's all. I'd like to hear from you.
Well, I'll do one word, yes, you're right. And there's 2 issues I'd like to follow that up with. One's whipping, because you've raised the issue of whipping. And I think that is really a difficult part of how our system works. And the Green Party does not whip. We have a no-whip system, so all the votes will be a free whip system. It's always one, isn't it? And it has to be our MP, yeah. But the other issue is about representation in Parliament, because that's ultimately where that question ends up. Because what will happen, unless they see sense and they do, like the LibDems and the Greens suggest, offer a referendum on the deal where we all get a say, don't get that, it will be whipped politicians in the Houses of Parliament. And these guys might say, no, they probably won't put a whip on it, but I guess they are going to. And so for me, there's a real problem, and I come back to it, it's our electoral system, where you end up in a situation where you do not have representatives in the House of Parliament which represent the broad views of the British people. So the 37% that you talked about is just one part. I mean, Heidi's been elected with a very small number of people relative to the overall. There's 80,000 people who could vote in South Cambs. Heidi gets around 30,000, which is brilliant. And she's a great MP. But there's 50,000 people in South Cambs who are not represented at all. Our voice is not represented. And that's not how it should be. That's why I'm slightly jaded when I come up here. Because I've spent 30 odd years not being represented. I spoke to a Labour supporter today who is actually giving up because she's lived in South Cambs and has never been represented in her whole life. And so we need a proportional system where it means that I can come out here and be excited and I can talk to individuals and say, look, you can really vote for what you believe in, because although Heidi will still be our parliamentary MP, and that's great, your voice will actually have counted, because the top-up system will allow other voices to be heard in Parliament, and that's the sort of modern democracy we need.
Thank you. As a European family myself, we are directly affected. My husband and children will lose their right to live in the Netherlands, where we have family. And so it is a personal matter for a lot of people. I'm very, I think you can't overstate the way in which Theresa May and the Conservative government's handling of the outcome of the referendum, never mind the shambles of the way that it was brought about in the first place, has deeply polarized our society. And so, apart from the enormous economic damage that this is going to have, it's a tragic time, I think, for us culturally. And I'm sure you also have met, people who say, I have a split in my family over this. It's become such a divisive, polarizing issue, and to me that is the saddest thing of all. I know lots of people, maybe because my family is half European, I'm aware of many people who are considering their options, and they're going to look at where their children have the best future, and maybe it isn't here. If lots of people are saying, I'm looking for my Irish passport, or my daughter's living in Germany and there's a better future there, and we'll all go in that direction. So more than anything, I feel extraordinarily sad, and I chose to come here 30 years ago. I love this country, and I love it because it's outward looking and international, more so than America, where I'm from, if I may say. And so that, personally, I feel very sad. Thank you.
Would you mind putting your hands up if you think we should not have had the referendum in the first place? Wow, quite a lot of people in the room. And that is exactly the Labour position as well, going back 2 years ago. The Liberal Democrats said we should have a decision at a referendum on Europe in 2010, and Clegg made that one of the cornerstones of him getting elected in 2010 and 15. And then, of course, we see after that, the Tories had a civil war with UKIP coming and bleeding their votes away. So they had said, we should have a referendum. Now, the referendum we were always against, and then it happened. We crashed through that awful, awful campaign with all the lies at 350 put on the side of the bus. And then we had a democratic decision which was taken. And I don't agree with the answer and the outcome, but it was a democratic decision, and that's the problem. What if you then say to the people, you know what, the campaign's not valid, we don't like it, we'll go again. What next? And that's the problem. So I feel your pain in that issue. I personally, if I was the MP here, would not have voted for Article 50. As we know, 1/4 of the LibDems did vote for Article 50. There's not that many of them, to be fair. But I would have done because I was in fact, if I was in this constituency, it would be a Remain constituency. if you have another referendum on a deal that's really bad for our country, or like Theresa May is suggesting, no deal at all, and you have a referendum, then that means, of course, Parliament's hands are tied a second time. And so you have to accept the decision then as well, which is why I'm actually against that. And I say, as Simon points out, it should be a non-whipped vote in Parliament, where leadership is actually shown in Parliament and it's not delegated to everyone, because that's not responsibility and that's not leadership.
So perhaps before I get on to the substance of the question about Brexit and how it's been handled, just drawing on one of the points that Simon made, and whatever the arguments about the electoral system we have at the moment, and it is an engaging argument we have all the time, just for the record, if I'm re-elected at the end of this week, I don't care how you vote, if you need my help, I represent you. So it doesn't matter if you're one of only 30,000 out of 80,000, every single person has the representation of their MP if their MP is doing the job correctly. In terms of Brexit, yes, I didn't want it to happen. But it wasn't a parliamentary vote on the June the 23rd, it was a referendum, that's a national vote. And we may have predominantly voted to remain, but are our voices and our votes more important than people in other parts of the country who voted to come out? We're equal. That's a referendum. And I agree with Dan, the minute you start ignoring a democratically taken decision, even if half the people didn't come out because it rained or they didn't want to, that's the minute you start sliding into a banana republic. So I had to support Article 50 because of the national vote. I felt I couldn't ignore it. But did I work with about 10 other Tory MPs, including the usual suspects Ken Clarke and Anna Soubry? Did we work together to push the government to give Parliament a final vote on the deal? Yes, we did. So I felt, therefore, I was honouring my responsibilities to South Cambridgeshire, whilst at the same time acknowledging the national decision. And that's the balance that an MP has to play. And we will have a vote on that final deal, and our role will be to scrutinise that deal and its proceedings as we move forward. And that is parliamentary sovereignty. And that's what MPs should do.
I might go for the man down the back in the orange shirt, please.
The Church's Joint Research Group has shown that the largest group who are in poverty in our country are children of working parents. Parents who cannot earn enough to pay the rent and feed and clothe their children. They do not seem to be the higher low-paid and the lower medium-paid jobs that they used to be spread through our society. What is to be done to address the poverty of working families?
That's a very difficult question, and it gets into a lot of the issues we've already talked about, including the cost of housing, affordable housing, which eats up so much of people's incomes, and our failure to address what really is affordable. We know that we have teachers using food banks, and that child poverty is at a completely unacceptable level, and it says a terrible thing about our society. I suppose there are all sorts of ways in which this needs to be addressed. One of the very practical measures that the LibDems have suggested is rolling out a good meal at school every day for all children, not just younger ones. We need to be we need to be scrutinising our tax system, and we need to be capturing the tax evasion, and we need to be putting far more money into our basic services. At local council level, there's a lot we cannot do to help people because we are being starved of revenue support. We are still managing to give to citizens advice bureaus because we know that their work is so valuable, but I think the fabric of public services and supporting people at the very local level has been very damaged by the starvation of our local authorities, who are entrusted to provide housing, provide transport, make it possible for people of issues that need to be sorted, but I think we have to look at ground level first. Thank you.
That's a very easy question to answer, actually. I don't think it's difficult at all. It's an ideological policy of austerity we've suffered from for 7 years. So, to answer the question, not in negatives, put something positive, we get rid of the benefits cap. We get things like Sure Start centres open again to really give children opportunities. We bring in free school meals into schools. I think the pupil premium idea is a great one. We need to go further than that to make sure that poorer children are given the opportunities in the future. We need to make sure we don't have a selective education system. The analogy I've used for this yesterday, in fact, I use here. If you said to all people, can you go forward and take a driving test to get into university? The ones who could afford the lessons would pass the test. The ones who couldn't afford the lessons would fail the test. And that's exactly what these selective education tests are about to get to grammar schools. So we think we have to have a system where we actually invest in education. But finally, the most important one is to stop demonising the poor. By saying in the Daily Mail, people are scroungers and all these horrific, I won't even use the word, they're just actually contemptible. These different words that are used by the Daily Mail and other newspapers mean that people have this real down, horrible view of people who are actually struggling. And it's children who suffer the most. And the fact that we have a society where people are working, and because of working tax credits being under threat, they can't actually afford to feed their children properly, is a disgrace. And demonisation is a big part of that, and that must go.
Some of you may know that when I made my maiden speech, I caused a little bit of a stir. Because I challenged George Osborne, who, by the way, did you not know is not standing again for a parliament? A little piece of information. I challenged him, as Chancellor as he was at the time, on the plans to cut tax credits, which are the top-ups, as you will know, that a lot of working families on modest incomes, modest incomes have. And we were going to do it overnight, before our planned lifting of the national living wage, in order to the lowest tax threshold. And I said that was wrong. And we stopped that. And we reversed and stopped those tax credit cuts. The government is doing some great stuff. You know, we do have record numbers of jobs. People are in work more than ever before. And the best route out of poverty must surely be working and being able to pay to feed your family. But actually, the housing part, which I think, forgive me, Susan, I think you mentioned that, the housing part is the biggest strain on the financial budget of households. And another reason why I've been on the naughty step again, my government, was I believe the benefit system, universal credit, which is coming in to replace all the benefit system. It's a great system, actually, but it needs the money in to fund it. And I argued ahead of the autumn statement with Ian Duncan-Smith, don't boo, he's lovely really. I argued with him that money would be better put into universal credit to enable people to keep more of the money they earned before it was taken off them in benefit reclaim than it would be to raise the tax allowance, because we all benefit from the tax allowance. I benefit from the tax allowance when it's raised and I don't need it. And we were partially successful. We managed to secure £1 billion extra to be pumped back into universal credit. And if I'm re-elected this week, that's the angle I will continue to take, because I believe that a system that really gently graduates people into work and lets them be weaned off the benefit system is the best way to empower people, make them feel braver about getting back into work and taking more hours. 30 hours of free childcare, that has to help. We're raising the national minimum wage, but on universal credit, that's something that I will continue to sit on the naughty step on if you choose to vote for me again at the end of this week.
Again, this is an ideological question because it is about a concept of social justice. And at the moment, I'm afraid our country is moving further and further away from what I believe and what the Greens believe is a fair system of social justice. We're heading back to almost Edwardian disparity in terms of the wealth that's being held by the very rich and unfortunately the number of poor that's growing, as you rightly said in your question. So there is a much bigger perspective at play here. And as Dan rightly pointed out, there's all sorts of issues that can be done. There's a bigger perspective about how we as a society become a fairer, caring society that really puts equality at the heart of what we're trying to do for everyone. And I'm afraid the current austerity and the current direction of travel from the Tory government is not going to achieve that. It's moving in the opposite direction. So for us in the Green Party, it is about saying, okay, we need to tax and we need to take more money from the wealthy people in this society and we need to distribute it in a fairer way. But more than that, we need to understand as a society why we're doing that. And I think we can learn lessons from many of our European neighbours. Many of those, the Scandinavian economies, Holland, I've been to those places and I've felt that there's a general understanding that taking and giving are part of a collective benefit. And that we in this society, we seem to be like, we don't want to give any money away. The rich are very tight about everything. Even the well-off in the middle classes tend to be obsessed with holding on to money, rather than us trying to see the broader benefits for everyone if we can create an equitable and a just system that we can all enjoy.
Yes. The lady in red.
Thank you. We've had 7 years of austerity, no public sector spending increases, working people relying on food banks, 0-hour contracts, and now Theresa May has done another U-turn. She asks us to trust her with Brexit negotiations. She asks us to trust her with running the country. I see it on a daily basis, people in my street that are surviving, and I mean just surviving. This is not the big society, we're not all in this together. And I want the panel to tell us, and I'd like to ask Heidi Allen, the debt of this country has risen under the Conservatives. And also, how can we have to survive on very little money when we both work? Why is it that people have to suffer under a Tory government? Where's the fairness when you vote yourselves to have pay increases while the rest of us are at the bottom lining your pockets?
Thanks. Thank you. We will start with you then.
Thank you. Really poignant question, really personal. What was your name, sorry? Teresa. And you say you both work?
We both work. We both live in a council house. We both just about manage.
And that is not an unusual story, unfortunately, is it, Teresa? And thank you for raising that issue, because, okay, so my wife's a doctor, I was a teacher, we can't afford to live in this society right now either. And actually it's ideological, because it's all very well to say there are many jobs being made, whether on 0-hour contracts, that's a small print that you don't hear. We've raised the national minimum wage, but when you're 25 and up only. When you need it, when you're younger, you don't get it. And also we've cut, of course, you'll find from this government, the taxes on the hedge funds, we've cut the taxes for top earners, corporation tax has been cut. So that is why the debt's increasing, and yet we demonise people who are struggling. But actually, let's be honest, we're all struggling now. This is becoming the norm. And it's almost like we say, but that's okay, it's acceptable in some way, because we can't actually afford to pay for ourselves. In the 5th largest economy, we can't pay for decency for everyone. Well, that's rubbish. And Simon hit the nail on the head, it's an ideological policy. So let's be honest for once, let's actually put the money where it's needed, and let's be honest about the fact the economic revival has not been there. We've doubled the national debt in this country because of tax cuts to the rich and taken away from the poor. So let's actually try to rebalance society, and that's why I'm so proud of our manifesto, because it does put that at the very core of what we believe in. On Thursday, you have a real choice. You can't have always said that in the past, I'll be quite honest. But this Thursday you do. You're not in the ballot box, polling station, to fill in that form, to think to yourself, is it about a voting system? Is it about this, that and the other? No, it's actually a choice about where you want the country to go when it comes to this social injustice we face right now. So thank you for raising that issue, and I'd say Labour is the choice to really try to rebalance our imbalanced and unjust society.
So first and foremost, I can't pretend that I understand how hard your life might be. So hats off to you for being brave enough and standing up and confronting. I know that question was directed at me, and that's fine. We haven't paid off as much of the debt or balanced the deficit as we would have liked. I can't pretend that we have. The road to getting a balanced economy and budget is hard. We were hit hard by the economic recession, and I think it's been harder probably than any of us thought it was going to be. And running a government isn't easy, and it's a delicate balance between how much you spend and how much you invest versus the money that you have in. And if you get that balance wrong and you spend too much, you know, I don't need to tell you this. The risk is that inflation rockets, everybody suffers, and the economy as a whole starts to stagnate. And it's difficult to get it moving again in the right direction, but we are starting to. There is a reason why there are a record number of jobs in this year. And things like the national living wage rising, taking everybody out of the lower tax threshold means everybody, without exception, gets £1,000 more in their pocket each year. These things help, but it is slow and I can't pretend that it isn't. You mentioned zero-hours contracts. I think they're wrong if that's all your employer's offering to you. But for some people, they do work. For seasonal labour, for students who just want to work a couple of hours at the weekend, they do work. But what we need to make sure, and we've looked at this very closely on the Select Committee as on the work and pensions, that it shouldn't be the only thing that an employer offers. And if that's what they're doing, then that's wrong. I mentioned in my last answer about the universal credit benefit system, and that's where I would like the government to invest more money, because I do think that will help people transition into more work, and it's something that I would continue to fight for. But a personal promise from me to you, if I am voted back in at the end of this week, if you want to come and see me and we'll talk about you and your family and whether you're getting all the help you can get from your job centre, from your employer, I will try and help you.
I can't vote for you, Harvey.
No, just I'm not asking you to vote for me.
Can we allow the person to speak, please? I'd rather we didn't. If we get into the business of backwards and forwards like that, we will immediately sink into a sort of a chaos that doesn't help. I'm sorry, I understand the problem, but we can't go that way.
With due respect, not everybody falls into the line where they claim benefits. You've got £2 over that limit.
Thanks, you've had your question. We have to move on, please, to give everybody a chance. I appreciate it's very personal, but we cannot allow it to go to one person. It just won't work.
Yeah, I won't say what I've said already again, but you heard what I said about the overall picture, and that is actually the important thing here, because the recession that you've talked about was brought on by deregulation, by an ideological movement that has deregulated a sector which blew up. The Americans spent $700 billion rescuing a failing system. And so we cannot pretend this is not ideological, because what happened after the big crash is an ideological choice. And as I said before, you have before you a decision whether that carries on, whether austerity carries on, whether we carry on down that same path of deregulation, of privatisation, of allowing companies to do what they like almost. This is something that is fundamentally important to our country, and I would hope that you all think about that very carefully, because for me, as Dan has said, it's about trying to change that and about trying to bring about a new form of politics and a different form of society that's fairer and more just.
Thank you for the question. I think your question points exactly to the reason why we don't need to rerun the referendum. We need a referendum, we need an understanding on the details of where we're going with our relationship with Europe, because the effect on our economy will be so profound. So whatever one thinks ideologically about our relationship with Europe, if we're just going to think about the economy, and that relates to the last question too on child poverty, we are going to torch our economy if we get this wrong. So I would put that as my first response. I agree completely that there's a culture here in which we are not spending in the ways that some of our European neighbours are on social services and welfare. In Scandinavia and the Netherlands, there is a culture that accepts that we pay into these services and all of society pays in, and we have very, very good public services as a result. It's astonishing when you go and visit. When I go and visit my in-laws in Holland, it is astonishing the level of the quality of life and social welfare is just so much better. But they spend more as a society, and they accept that this is a good thing to do. Here in Cambridgeshire, local Conservative county councillors have elected to impose more cuts than the government asked us to make. And this is very, very difficult to understand, except that elections were coming up and there are no more UKIP councillors at the county now, but they have joined the Conservative benches, and that culture has changed the way that the county is making even more cuts. And Dan mentioned the Sure Start children's centres, these will be affected too.
Okay. You've had a question waiting for a while, the man in the checkered shirt. No, I want to do it back on. Good try.
This is a question about science funding. So, as Heidi said, so Southampton, Cambridge is one of the richest in the world in terms of science research and funding. We get most of our millions, if not billions, each year in Southampton, Cambridge by the EU, and we benefit from the freedom movement as well. It takes about 2 years to get science projects up and running and started, and we're already sort of deficit after this 2-year Brexit period. What are each party going to do to ensure research council money will be increased after the 2-year period?
Well, you perhaps know my degree is in astrophysics, so in terms of an appreciation of science and the value it can bring, you're preaching to the converted. But you're right, we have enjoyed that relationship with Europe for the brains and the skills and the collaboration, not just for the money. The government has already said it will match funding and ensure that no funding is reduced as a consequence. In terms of funding going forward, I was so pleased to see in our manifesto that we're pledged to spend 2.4% of our GDP on science, R&D, with an aspiration to get to 3% eventually. At the moment, it's around about 3%, I think. If you look at France and Germany, they spend around about 0.7. So for us to get to 2.4 and an aspiration to 3 is massive. And that tells me how the government gets the value of science. You know, there's a reason the Prime Minister came up to the Genome Campus about 6 months ago to announce 2.7 billion, I think it was, investment in R&D. There's a reason she came here. They get it. David Davis has been up to Cambridge numerous times since the Brexit vote to understand what this region needs. And on the freedom movement to skills as well, absolutely. You know, any changes to our immigration policy absolutely still must allow that collaboration and free movement of skills and brains. And that's what I was talking about earlier, about not sticking my head in the sand over Brexit, but accepting and grabbing the opportunity that we have. The government has to listen to what we need, because if they don't, the UK economy doesn't work. But the fact that they've put this commitment to spend on science tells me that they've understood that message loud and clear already.
Sorry for some applause there. But I don't really have to. On science, the Green Party have said that they will match funding that's lost. It's very straightforward. I'm interested to hear that the Tory Party are getting science. It's no, I agree with you, sir. They don't, because the Climate Secretary, the Tory Climate Secretary, 2 ago, refused to go and have meetings with the Chief Scientific Advisor. So that tells you quite a lot about where the Tory Party are with science. And I go back to what I handed out earlier. There is a huge amount of science that is telling us we are facing a massive planetary crisis. And unfortunately, the main parties are not listening to that scientific voice. They are not sitting down and saying that this is something we need to do about now. And it's not on the agenda. I mean, again, we've not had a question about it, which is why I'm shoehorning it into this. And for me, it's so fundamental. The planetary crisis we're facing is going to affect all of us, way beyond Brexit, way beyond any of the things we're talking about. The Green Party is about looking ahead. It's looking 50, 70, 100 years ahead, not 5 years ahead, which is what the political discourse is always all about, what we're going to do in the next 5 years. We need to change that culture. We need to start planning sensibly, using the science we've got, and the science is unequivocal, and actually sitting down and planning energy policy for the next 50, 100 years, planning transport policy for the next 50, 100 years, planning our food. I can't even begin to get into our food system. And we must change the way we look at those things. We must start planning long term, and we must start listening to our scientists.
Thank you very much for the question. I guess the first thing I would say is that science is collaborative and it doesn't exist just within the UK. I've been visiting some businesses at one of the science parks in South Cambs. They have described the sort of the flow of sort of top graduates who have received European science funding, then come to work for an international South Cambs-based company. A company that's 14 people strong is putting about, they reckon, $500,000 into the economy. That $500,000 could be supporting a school. So there's a whole chain of benefits that are attached to that science funding. And collaboration is the name of the game. And the UK cannot do this on its own. I think it's absolutely unrealistic for any party, including my own, to pledge that when we leave the EU, we're just going to make it up and give it to you. It won't be like that. And so it's a completely false pledge. We can talk about what kind of Brexit we have, and I hope it's the best one, but whatever relationship we get, the consensus that I keep hearing from all of these companies and the university is that we will not be in as good a position as we are now. And that is the point that we have to get to grips with. And I don't think, speaking as, I'm a lay person, and I've been doing my best for a long time to try to understand, the dynamics of all of this. It's complicated, and therefore it goes back to the reason why we have to pause and understand what we're doing with Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I didn't catch your name, sorry. Okay, anonymous. Are you in the science field? Is it yourself? Yeah. Well, this is a personal question for me because my wife currently is trying to find a cure for cancer, renal cancer. She did a PhD at the university, so she's working in the lab. And I know firsthand from her colleagues and also from other scientist friends of mine that they are terrified because the funding coming from Europe currently is kind of, well, I'll just give you an example. At the moment, currently from the European funding, it goes firstly to France as the biggest recipient, then it's Spain, thirdly it's Cambridge University. So if you imagine, when it comes to the scale of the economy of science, this is pretty major. And I know firsthand from talking to scientists who are not just actually from Europe, but from other parts of the world, they feel that this is a country that's becoming illiberal because of the negotiations, because of what we're facing. And they're worried that, and actually I'll give you an example of one man in particular who's really quite worried now because he's leading a project, but because it's a European collaboration, he might actually lose his position. So it actually is really important that we put that at the forefront of our negotiations when it comes to Brexit, because the collaboration has to continue. We can't just close it off. Science is global, it's international. If we're not working with the rest of the world, it's actually going against the very nature of what science is. So it's really important to remember that. And that's why we have to also make sure we're pledged to this, to protect the rights of EU citizens in our country. That is so essential right now, because in my wife's department, out of the people there, I think about a quarter might have to leave the country if these negotiations aren't done properly. And you imagine the impact on cancer research that's going to have. So I think that's really essential. So the relationship with Europe going forwards.
We need a question from this side. Mark, would you like to ask your question? Yeah. Mark, yes. Thank you.
Good evening. This is the most presidential general election I can remember. I don't remember that many. I think I first voted in '92. So my question is, we have Theresa Bott 4000, weak and wobbly. We have a venal, sneering, unprincipled liar, Corbyn. We have cheeky chappy Tim, who hasn't really left the sixth form debating society yet. And we have the right-on Greens, who have so right-on they have a man and a woman as a leader, and have completely forgotten your radical roots, which is quite depressing to me. So my question is quite simple. Defend your leader.
I hope that some of you will have watched the leader debate, and she was fantastic. And you're right, she is a very strong, wonderful woman. We're very proud to have as our leader, and I would suggest that she would be a fantastic PM. Obviously that's not going to happen, which is a real shame. I would take you up on radical roots, because we do retain our radical roots, and Caroline puts that across very well, I think. So, Caroline is great, that's my defence.
I would first say that the LibDem leader is a normal person without airs and graces, and he watches Bake Off apparently. I like the fact that he's down to earth and not airbrushed. And I really like the fact that in this year, which has been we are at a turning point in history, I think he has captured the key issue and made it the headline issue. It isn't necessarily the easiest issue for us to get to grips with, but he has put Brexit into the election big time, and we need to have the discussion. So I'm very grateful that he's done that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I reject the premise of the question, because if we allow ourselves to think we are presidential, then we're going down the American route, and that's not what we are, let's be honest. We are voting for, on Thursday, a movement, a set of policies, a set of ideas, and a Labour team, I suggest, who are going to lead this country into better places. I think we have seen things become more presidential, not just this election, and it shouldn't be happening, but if you think that certainly when it came to Blair and Major wasn't presidential, or Thatcher and Foote wasn't presidential, then I think you're sort of, mistaken there, because it has been, and it's not the way our system works. You're electing a manifesto to become a mandate, and that's the essential part of it, so that you can hold the government to account, whoever they are. You can say to them, this is your manifesto, you said these promises. You might U-turn on them before the election, but you said these promises. And we demand that now that you have been elected, that you actually do these promises, and that is what you're waiting for, not personality. I suspect, if it goes badly wrong for the blue team on Thursday, that they would be quite happy to say it's quite presidential so they can stab Theresa May in the back. I suspect, because we have seen that before with Thatcher, we have seen it before the leaders in that party. So maybe that's their rationale, but it's the manifesto you're voting for. Do not forget that.
So leadership is hard. Leadership is standing up and putting your head above the parapet, knowing that you're going to be shot down. I know, because I've done it. But you do it because you're putting your country first. Leadership is hard because sometimes you have to make friends and build relationships with people you really don't want to, and you certainly don't want to hold their hand. And that's hard, but you do it because you put your country first. Leadership is hard because sometimes you have to do things that you didn't want to, but you do it because you put your country first and you are a public servant. And leading is hard because sometimes you, against your own feelings, believe that your role is to fulfil and listen to the wishes of the British people. And that is being a Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been going for an hour and a half. Our candidates are no doubt quite tired, and it's very hot up here on the platform. I think that we should conclude. I think it would be appropriate that we have a moment of prayer for our nation and our government. If you don't share my faith, that's fine. I'm sure your wishes will be with them and your thoughts will be with them. I am grateful that we have decent people standing as our candidates for all parties. I am very grateful for that. And we all should be grateful for that because many people do not get this privilege. Could we please have a moment? God, we pray for our nation and we pray for the decision we are going to make in a few days' time. We pray for our candidates that they will remain people of integrity in a very difficult place that politics is.
and we pray that you will guide us to be a just and honest people. Amen.
Amen.